Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a time when kingdoms weren't just divided by borders. They were divided by pride, vanity, and beauty. And somewhere in that dangerous mix stood a queen so captivating that entire nations lost their minds over her. Her story isn't just about love or betrayal. It's about how the shimmer of one woman's charm cracked the peace of Europe and set off what we now call the 100 Years' War. You probably won't survive this one, at least not without questioning how much trouble beauty can cause. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and the time where you're watching this, because this tale feels different at midnight, doesn't it? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk through the shadowy corridors of medieval France, the air thick with candle smoke and gossip. Outside, the wind howls through stone castles, carrying whispers of a queen so beautiful that even paintings fail to capture her. Her name, Isabella of France. But people would remember her by another name entirely, the she-wolf of France. You can almost see her now. Eyes like sharpened sapphires, voice soft as silk yet dangerous enough to unseat kings. She isn't a myth. She's very real. And tonight, she's waiting for you to understand the chaos she unleashed. But before you meet her, you need to know the world she walked into. France in the early 1300s was a kingdom balancing on a knife's edge. The Capetian dynasty, once mighty, was gasping its last breaths. The royal family had more secrets than heirs, and the line of succession was about to break like thin ice. Imagine this. King Philip IV, tall, stern, and paranoid, ruling a kingdom that looked peaceful but was rotting underneath. His sons were princes, yes, but they were also players in a dangerous family drama. 3 sons, 3 fragile reigns, and no surviving male heir strong enough to carry the bloodline forward. Now here's the historical fact. When Philip IV died in 1314, he left behind not a legacy of strength, but a curse of instability. Each of his sons, Louis VI, Philip V, and Charles IV, would wear the crown, and each would die without leaving a legitimate male heir. You can feel the storm building already. And in the center of this brewing disaster stood Isabella, Philip's daughter. She was married off to England's King Edward II because that's what royal daughters were for, political peace offerings dressed in silk. But peace wasn't what she brought. At first, her marriage was the fairy tale everyone expected. France and England, united by beauty and diplomacy, but it didn't take long for the glitter to fade. Edward II was, let's say, distracted. His closest companion wasn't his queen, but his favorite courtier, Piers Gaveston, a man so flamboyant that he made nobles grind their teeth in envy. Scholars still argue whether Edward's affection for Gaveston was romantic or just obsessive friendship, but either way, Isabella was humiliated. You can almost hear the whispers following her through the English court. The French queen can't even control her husband. She stayed silent, smiling through the mockery, but silence has its own kind of violence. By the time you reach 1320 in this dimly lit hall of history, Isabella is no longer the diplomatic princess. She's a woman scorned, calculating her revenge. She writes letters to her French brothers, weaving alliances in ink. She studies power the way others study poetry. And when the English barons finally revolt against Edward II's favoritism, Isabella watches it unfold like a play written just for her. Gaveston is executed, his head separated from his pride. For a brief moment, you might think justice is served, but the queen's eyes don't soften. They only grow colder. Years later, another favorite appears, Hugh Despenser, more cruel and ambitious than Gaveston ever was. Edward II becomes his puppet, and Isabella? she becomes a prisoner in her own palace. Despenser takes her lands, her jewels, even her dignity. That's when something snaps. Picture her one rainy night standing before the mirror, her crown heavy, her reflection trembling in candlelight. A queen in name, a captive in truth. You can almost hear her whisper, "If I can't rule beside my king, I'll rule without him." And she means it. In 1325, Isabella escapes to France under the pretext of diplomacy. Officially, she's there to negotiate peace between her husband and her brother, the King of France. Unofficially, she's plotting the most dangerous betrayal in medieval Europe. She finds an ally in Roger Mortimer, an exiled English nobleman with equal parts charm and ruthlessness. Together, they become the most scandalous pair of their time, a queen and her lover, united not by passion, but by revenge. You follow them across candlelit banquets and whispered midnight councils, where rebellion is planned over wine and flirtation. Every move Isabella makes now is deliberate. Every smile hides a dagger. And by 1326, she sails back to England, not as a wife, but as an invader. Her army lands on English soil, banners snapping in the wind. The people, weary of Edward's cruelty, rally behind her. The king flees. The queen advances. Within months, Isabella captures her husband and his despised favorite. Despenser is executed in a way so gruesome, it makes even hardened soldiers turn pale. And Edward II? He's deposed, forced to abdicate in favor of his son, Edward III. For a while, Isabella rules as regent, her beauty now mixed with the scent of iron and smoke. She's not just a queen anymore, she's a legend. The French princess who conquered England without lifting a sword. But legends have shadows, and hers is darker than she ever imagined. Because while she thought she'd rewritten history, all she did was light the fuse of a far greater war, one that would outlive her, her lover, and her son. You can almost feel it in the air, the whisper of destiny tightening its grip, ready to turn one woman's vengeance into a century-long catastrophe. The war hasn't started yet, but you can already hear its footsteps in the dark. You find yourself walking through the cobbled streets of France, years after Isabella's triumph. The smoke from her rebellion has drifted across the channel, but the air here feels heavier, like the kingdom itself is holding its breath. You glance around and see cathedrals rising from the mist, nobles whispering in corners, and banners fluttering with the blue fleur-de-lis. France looks glorious, but you can tell it's fracturing from within. The Capetian dynasty, which had ruled for centuries, is gone. The throne now sits under the shaky rule of Philip VI of Valois, a man chosen not by blood, but by convenience. He's competent, charming in that overly political way, but everyone knows he's not the rightful heir. Not truly. See, France had a little problem called Salic law. It said that no woman could inherit the throne, and, this is the key, no man could claim it through a woman. It was designed to keep power purely male, though you and I both know purity and politics never mix well. But that same law has now made enemies out of family, because across the channel, a young and ambitious English king, Edward III, the son of Isabella, is staring at France's crown with a mix of entitlement and hunger. You can almost see him, standing at his window in Windsor Castle, the firelight catching his armor. His mother, the she-wolf herself, once dethroned his father. And now, her son wants to dethrone France. By right of my mother, he says, I am the heir of France. It sounds poetic. It also sounds like war. But here's where it gets messy, because France doesn't want an Englishman on its throne, not even a half-French one. So when Edward sends polite messages about his rightful inheritance, France responds with something between laughter and insult. Still, you can't laugh at ambition, can you? Edward begins quietly, claiming lands in Aquitaine, strengthening naval power, marrying his children into influence. The court poets call him a lion. The French call him arrogant. Scholars still argue whether Edward genuinely believed in his legal claim, or whether it was just an excuse to expand his empire. Either way, belief isn't what starts wars, ego does, and France was bursting with it. Philip VI, the new French king, saw Edward's ambitions as an open threat. Every treaty became a test of pride, every diplomatic meeting a game of chess played with daggers under the table. You might expect peace talks, right? Nope. What you get instead is taxation, shipbuilding, and spies switching sides faster than the ink dries on treaties. Mainstream historians will tell you the 100 Years' War officially began in 1337. But the truth is, it started the moment France underestimated Isabella's son. Edward had inherited his mother's cunning, her patience, and unfortunately her grudge. By the time the first battles began, France and England weren't just fighting for territory, they were fighting for validation. France wanted to prove its independence. England wanted to prove its dominance. The problem? Neither side knew how to quit. You walk past rows of tents pitched under stormy skies, English soldiers laughing, sharpening blades, unaware that some of them won't see another dawn. Across the river, the French knights polish their armor, confident in their chivalric code. They believe in valor, in honor, in fighting like gentlemen. You almost want to warn them, this isn't going to be that kind of war, because gunpowder is coming, and so is plague. But for now, in the early 1340s, everything still feels medieval, majestic, slow, and cruel. Edward's first move is clever. Instead of attacking head-on, he uses diplomacy like a knife. He allies with rebellious French nobles, lures mercenaries with gold, and even gains support from the Holy Roman Emperor. France finds itself surrounded before the first arrow even flies. And then comes the Sea Battle of Sluys, 1340, England's first great triumph. Imagine this: a massive naval clash off the coast of Flanders, masts colliding, arrows blotting out the sun. The French fleet once feared is shredded in a day. Contemporary chroniclers described it as a storm of iron and fire. You can almost smell the salt and smoke, hear the screams echoing over the waves. For the first time, Edward isn't just claiming France, he's taking it. Still, even victory comes at a price. His kingdom bleeds money. His soldiers grow restless. And across the water, Philip VI prepares for revenge. He builds alliances, gathers armies, and raises taxes so brutally that peasants begin to starve. But kings rarely notice the hunger of their people until it turns into rebellion. France's countryside starts to crack, villages burned, crops stolen, and whispers of divine punishment spreading like wildfire. And you know what's chilling? Amid all this chaos, the people don't blame kings or nobles. They blame beauty. You hear it in tavern songs and sermons. This all began with a queen's vanity. Isabella's name becomes a curse whispered by starving peasants, her image painted as a serpent draped in jewels. It's unfair, of course, but history doesn't care about fairness. It cares about stories. One odd detail you'll love. In some chronicles, Isabella's portraits were deliberately aged or disfigured by later artists, as if to visually punish her legacy. A queen too beautiful to be forgiven. You pass through a monastery library centuries later, and a monk's marginal note catches your eye. The war began with her smile. Maybe it's superstition, or maybe beauty, in the wrong century, really could destroy kingdoms. By the late 1340s, France and England are both exhausted, yet neither side is willing to step back. The war is no longer about claims. It's about pride. And pride, as you're learning, always demands payment in blood. When the bells toll in Paris, signaling yet another round of taxes for the king's holy cause, you almost expect the stones themselves to sigh. This isn't a war anymore. It's a long, slow unraveling. And it's only just beginning. You stand in a cold, dimly lit chamber, where a crown lies on a velvet cushion untouched. The air smells of dust, parchment, and something heavier, uncertainty. The old king is dying, and with his breath fades an entire era. France has known kings before, wise ones, cruel ones, forgettable ones, but none quite like Charles IV, the last of the direct Capetian line. He's young, ambitious, and painfully aware that the future of the kingdom rests on something as fragile as his wife's womb. Every cough, every sleepless night, echoes like a drumbeat of doom down the stone corridors of the Louvre. You watch as courtiers hover like vultures in silk. Every nobleman here has one eye on the king and the other on the empty throne. Charles IV's wife is pregnant, and the entire court holds its breath. If she gives birth to a son, the Capetian dynasty survives. If she doesn't, France plunges into chaos. And when the screams echo from her chamber one winter night in 1328, you already know how this story ends. It's a girl. The cradle rocks gently, and the old king turns away, defeated. Within weeks, Charles IV is dead, his crown without a rightful heir. You can almost hear history creaking under the weight of what's to come. France now has no king, no heir, and far too many opinions. There are 3 main claimants to the throne, and every one of them believes destiny is on his side. First, there's Philip of Valois, the late king's cousin, a pragmatic noble with deep roots in French politics. He's charming, decisive, and most importantly, he's male. The French nobility love that about him. Then there's Edward III of England, Isabella's son. Through his mother, he's the grandson of Philip IV, making his claim arguably stronger, at least in a family tree sense. But the French, of course, don't see it that way. No woman may inherit the throne, they say, and no man may claim through her. Finally, a third contender rises quietly from the sidelines. Joan II of Navarre, daughter of Louis VI, who also has a solid blood claim. But again, she's a woman. And in 14th century France, that's as good as being invisible. So, the nobles gather. The clerics pray. The lawyers argue for months in dusty chambers filled with wax seals and trembling candles. And in the end, they crown Philip of Valois as Philip VI of France. The decision seems logical. It's clean. It's safe. But deep down, you can sense the tremor of something dangerous. Because across the channel, a young Edward III feels betrayed. Imagine being 20-something, ambitious, and raised on the idea that the world owes you everything. Edward's mother, Isabella, whispers in his ear about lineage, legacy, and destiny. She reminds him again and again that he's the true heir to France. Her voice becomes the echo he can't silence, and so Edward swears he'll claim what's his, not today, not tomorrow, but someday. The seed of war has been planted. Years pass. Philip VI rules confidently, unaware that his throne is a borrowed one. France prospers briefly, its merchants growing rich on trade, its cities swelling with new cathedrals and art. But beneath the beauty lies resentment. The English still hold lands in Aquitaine, and every French tax feels like a challenge to that authority. Edward keeps playing polite, sending gifts, exchanging letters, but make no mistake, you can see him sharpening his claws behind the mask of diplomacy. And here's the quirky detail. At one royal banquet in Paris, when Philip VI mockingly referred to Edward as my vassal, the English king reportedly smiled and replied, "Perhaps for now." That smile? That was the sound of history loading its first arrow. Scholars still argue whether Edward genuinely wanted the French crown, or if he was simply provoked into war. Some say Isabella's ambition infected him. Others claim his pride couldn't handle being treated as a lesser monarch. But whatever the reason, in 1337, he finally does the unthinkable. He declares himself King of France. The French laugh at first. The English banners? In Paris? Ridiculous. But laughter dies quickly when English ships start torching French ports. The declaration is both bold and stupid, a move that transforms a personal feud into an intercontinental war. You picture Philip VI in his council chamber, face red with fury, slamming his fist against the map spread before him. To the French, this isn't just an invasion, it's an insult to their identity. And the worst part? The insult comes from a half-French king, born from their own royal blood. The irony isn't lost on anyone. As the first campaigns begin, you ride alongside knights whose armor glints like mirrors under the summer sun. They believe war is still noble, something to be sung about. They write poems about valor, about banners fluttering in the wind, about God choosing sides. But the truth is, war is about mud, starvation, and broken promises. And this war, this so-called 100 Years' War, will make sure everyone learns that lesson the hard way. By 1339, French villages burn like torches. The English advance deep into enemy territory, cutting supply lines, looting, and leaving behind nothing but smoke. In retaliation, the French strike back, raiding English garrisons, executing captured archers, and calling it divine justice. And still neither side wins. It's as if both kingdoms are trapped in a mirror, each too proud to look away first. The priests call it God's punishment. The poets call it destiny. But you, walking through this landscape of fire and ash, realize it's something simpler, something brutally human. It's the echo of one man's ambition, one woman's beauty, and one continent's pride. And in that echo, the sound of marching feet never fades. Because the real war isn't about who sits on the throne. It's about who deserves to. You wander through a hall filled with tapestries, silk threads depicting queens and angels, saints and sinners. And there, woven in shimmering gold, is a woman with sapphire eyes and a crown tilted slightly, like she's daring you to question her. That's Isabella of France, the queen who started all of this, beautiful, cunning, and quietly vengeful. You remember her, don't you? The daughter of a king, the wife of a weak one, the mother of a conqueror. But tonight, as the fire crackles and the shadows dance across her portrait, you realize she isn't done shaping history yet. Even in exile, her ghost lingers over every political move her son makes. Edward III might wear the crown, but her fingerprints are all over it. You can almost picture her in her final years, living in quiet luxury, her days spent praying, or pretending to pray. People call her the she-wolf, but she's more complicated than that. Maybe she's just a woman who refused to be silent in a world that told her to smile and obey. And yet you can't deny it. Her ambition lit a fire no one can now extinguish. Across the channel, her son Edward stands before his advisors, a map of France stretched across the oak table. His finger traces the rivers, the ports, the fertile lands of Normandy. Every red dot is a place he means to take. But there's one thing he doesn't have yet: money. Wars are expensive, especially when you're planning to invade another country with an army of thousands. So Edward turns to his merchants, his nobles, and the church. He promises spoils, titles, divine favor, whatever it takes. England becomes a kingdom on credit. You walk through London's streets where blacksmiths hammer night and day, women sew banners, and monks bless carts of arrows. The people call it God's war, but you can see the hunger in their eyes. They don't care about lineage. They care about survival. Then comes one of those strange little details history likes to hide in its corners. Edward, desperate for funding, allows privateers to plunder French merchant ships before the war is even official. It's piracy in royal clothing, and it works. France retaliates by seizing English holdings in Aquitaine. That's the moment the gloves come off. Scholars still argue whether Isabella encouraged her son to strike first or warned him to wait. Some letters hint she urged caution. Others suggest she quietly smiled when he declared himself King of France. But no matter her role, her legacy now sails with every English ship crossing the Channel. And so, the campaign begins. The English army lands in northern France, armor gleaming under a gray sky. The French forces, outnumbering them nearly 2-1, ride out to meet them near the Flemish coast. You stand on a ridge, watching the banners rise on both sides, the lions of England, the lilies of France. The wind carries the smell of salt and iron. Drums beat, horses snort, and for a moment both armies pause, as if realizing what's about to happen. Then the sky erupts. It's the Battle of Sluys, 1340, the first great clash of the 100 Years' War. Imagine it. Hundreds of ships chained together in the water, the English longbowmen firing from the masts, arrows darkening the sky. French sailors try to board, shouting prayers to saints who aren't listening. The sea turns red. Edward watches from his flagship, calm, calculating, every movement measured. He's learned something from his mother. Control is everything. By nightfall, the French navy is gone, sunk, burned, or captured. England now controls the Channel, and France has just learned that its enemy is no longer the reckless prince of yesterday. He's a strategist, but victory brings problems too. The English celebrate, yet the treasury runs dry again. Soldiers go unpaid, supplies run thin, and Edward's nobles begin whispering, "What if this endless war isn't winnable?" Meanwhile, in France, Philip VI faces the impossible task of explaining how an island nation just annihilated his navy. He blames the winds, the tides, even divine fate. But the truth is simpler. He underestimated his enemy. The French court grows tense. Taxes rise. The people mutter that the king is cursed. And somewhere, in her quiet chambers, Isabella hears the news and smiles faintly. Her son has done what her husband never could. He's made the world fear England. But pride is a fickle friend. You wander into the dim cathedral at Reims, where Philip VI kneels before the altar, praying for guidance. Candles flicker, their smoke curling upward like desperate pleas. He isn't praying for victory. He's praying for survival, because he knows what's coming. England won't stop. And France, the most powerful kingdom in Europe, is about to realize that even beauty and bloodlines can't protect a crown forever. You step back into the night air, where the wind from the Channel still smells faintly of ash. You think of Isabella, once adored, now cursed, and her son, the lion-hearted king chasing his mother's shadow. They say wars are fought with swords, but that's a lie. They're fought with memories, with grudges, with the ghosts of choices people pretend were destiny. And as you stand there, the waves whisper like a warning. This war has only begun to breathe. You cross the narrow streets of medieval England, lantern light flickering on timbered houses, and feel the weight of a kingdom poised on the edge of ambition. Edward III is young, energetic, and if you look closely, haunted by the stories of his mother, Isabella. Every day he grows into a ruler who combines her cunning with his own insatiable hunger for power. And then there's the Count, the French prince across the Channel. You can almost see him pacing in his own palace, unaware that his every move is being tracked by spies, scouts, and yes, Isabella's whispering legacy. Edward sees this man not just as a cousin or rival, but as a symbol of everything that France owes him. And in the quiet hours of the night, he dreams of crowns, banners, and the smell of victory. Mainstream history calls him the Black Prince, but that's a title he earns later. Right now, he's simply Edward, a son with a claim and a plan. He's calculating, patient, and extremely English in his methods. Strategy over spectacle, logic over legend. Meanwhile, you wander through Aquitaine, the contested duchy, where villagers whisper that their lands are being used as pawns in a game they'll never win. Sheep are stolen, wine barrels looted, and yet everyone pretends life goes on as normal. But every arrow shot, every tax raised, carries the echo of Isabella's charm, the woman whose beauty started all of this. Oddly, some chroniclers mention that Edward's fascination with chivalry borders on obsession. During his campaigns, he reportedly commissioned extravagant armor in gold and enamel, with scenes of his mother's court depicted on the breastplate. It's bizarre, but you can see it as a psychological weapon. Edward is literally wearing Isabella's legacy into battle. Scholars still argue whether this psychological warfare was intentional or merely the result of Edward's vanity, but either way, it works. You move along the narrow riverbanks to witness the first skirmishes. English longbowmen, firing volleys that darken the morning sky. French knights charge recklessly, their horses' hooves pounding mud and dust, lances raised high. It's brutal, chaotic, and exhilarating in the most terrifying way. By the end of the day, the Count's forces retreat, battered and humiliated. Edward, however, doesn't celebrate. Not yet. He's already thinking 3 steps ahead. Supply lines, reinforcements, alliances. The seeds of strategy are sown here, in small victories that look like luck to outsiders. Back in Paris, Philip VI seethes. His advisors whisper that Edward is clever, ruthless, perhaps even more cunning than Isabella herself. You can almost hear the sarcasm in their voices. A son guided by a woman's charm. What could possibly go wrong? But even as France braces, Isabella's influence is invisible yet palpable. Her alliances, her letters, her teachings echo through Edward's decisions. You realize that power isn't just inherited, it's taught, and she taught him well. By 1346, Edward's ambitions stretch across the Channel. He's no longer just reclaiming ancestral lands, he's claiming a kingdom. His army marches in perfect order, discipline unlike anything the French have seen. And when they clash at Crécy, history will remember it as a turning point. You stand on a hill above the battlefield, hearing the clanging of swords and the whinnying of panicked horses. The sun glints off steel armor, and arrows blot out the horizon like a storm of black rain. Odd detail, some soldiers reportedly painted their shields with crude depictions of Isabella's face, almost as a psychological taunt. Imagine facing a volley of arrows while seeing the queen who indirectly started this war, staring back at you from every shield. The battle ends in disaster for the French. Thousands are dead. Philip II survives but shaken, his army shattered, morale at its lowest. Edward, victorious, rides through the carnage with careful composure. He doesn't gloat. He absorbs the moment, aware that Isabella's shadow looms behind every decision. And now, as you follow him through the charred fields, you notice the eerie quiet. Villagers peek from behind ruined fences, mourning lives lost yet silently acknowledging that a new era has begun. The war is no longer theoretical. It's lived in mud, blood, and smoke. And you realize, if you hadn't noticed already, that the entire chain of events, Isabella's marriage, her cunning, her exile, was all the prelude to this moment. You shiver slightly as the wind carries the metallic scent of battle. Beauty, ambition, revenge. They're not just words. They're instruments of war. And from the sidelines, you can almost hear Isabella whispering, "This is only the beginning." You trace the tangled web of royal bloodlines, and it's dizzying. The crown isn't just a piece of metal. It's a symbol of legitimacy, ancestry, and stubborn pride. France and England are locked in a centuries-long struggle, but the roots of that conflict are buried in lineage, marriages, and broken promises. You can almost see a family tree stretching across the channel, each branch a possible claim, each leaf a discarded heir. Philip Sixkin of Valois sits on the French throne, claiming legitimacy through the male line. He's technically lawful, politically convenient, and deeply unpopular with some distant cousins who think the crown should have passed elsewhere. Meanwhile, Edward III insists his mother, Isabella, makes him the rightful heir. His argument is simple, elegant, and maddening. By blood, the crown belongs to me. The debate is endless. Scholars still argue whether the French nobility's decision to crown Philip was truly legal or a convenient excuse to avoid an English king. Either way, it's a perfect example of how dynastic claims ignite wars. As you wander through royal archives, you see letters, proclamations, and threats, all meticulously written, each word a dagger. The English claim isn't abstract. It's spelled out in ink and blood. The French response isn't abstract either. It's steel and fire. Oddly, in the midst of this tension, you stumble upon the role of minor nobles, men whose loyalties shift like sand. One day they swear allegiance to Philip, the next to Edward, depending on who offers land, titles, or a more attractive marriage proposal. It's petty, hilarious, and deadly all at once. These small decisions, alliances, betrayals, bribes, compound into battles, sieges, and long campaigns. Meanwhile, Isabella's influence continues in subtle ways. Even across the channel, her advice, letters, and example shape her son's decisions. Edward doesn't simply act on ambition alone. He acts with the cunning she imparted. You can almost feel her guiding his hand as he signs treaties, negotiates alliances, and plots invasions. The map of France becomes a chessboard. Normandy, Brittany, and Aquitaine, each region shifts control like pieces in a grand game. And every capture, every siege, has consequences for civilians who barely appear in history books. Villagers are burned out, crops stolen, homes destroyed, all because of the interplay of royal bloodlines, ambition, and yes, a queen's beauty that lit the fuse. You pause at one castle, perched on a hill overlooking a river. You can almost hear the whispers of medieval historians, their debates echoing through the stone halls. Was Edward's claim valid? Was Philip justified? Or were they just pawns in Isabella's plan? Scholars will never agree, but for you, the tension is palpable. The 100 Years' War is not just about armies or battles. It's about legal loopholes, marriages, and claims that span generations. A crown that seems small and tangible carries centuries of obligation, pride, and resentment. And in the midst of it all, one queen's decisions ripple outward like stones dropped in a pond. Oddly, some chroniclers note that Edward III would sometimes consult Isabella's portraits before key decisions, perhaps a reminder of his lineage, or perhaps superstition. The line between strategy and obsession blurs. You feel it too. The weight of history pressing down. Every sword drawn, every arrow loosed is tied to these tangled claims. Every war tax, every burnt village stems from questions of inheritance, legitimacy, and pride. And as you trace this lineage, you begin to understand. The war isn't merely about territory. It's about identity, honor, and the stubborn belief that bloodline determines destiny. You step back, breathe in the misty air over the Seine, and realize that the crown, once a symbol of authority, is now a beacon of conflict, greed, and ambition. And through it all, Isabella's beauty, cunning, and influence remain a ghostly thread, weaving the two nations together in inevitable confrontation. You find yourself in the grand throne room of France, the walls lined with tapestries depicting battles long past. But today, the real fire isn't on the walls, it's in the hearts of kings and nobles. Every word, every glance carries tension, as if the air itself expects a spark, and sparks in this world ignite wars. Edward III has made his move, claiming France through his mother. Philip VI, the French king, can feel the weight of insult pressing on his crown. Pride courses through the veins of every noble in the room. One careless word, one arrogant gesture, could turn diplomacy into bloodshed. And unsurprisingly, that is exactly what happens. A council meeting turns into a shouting match. One French baron laughs at Edward's claim. Another whispers that his English cousin isn't even worth acknowledging. Edward, hearing of these remarks, tightens his grip on the channel crossings, controls trade routes, and quietly prepares an invasion. You can almost see the tension stretching across the channel like a taut rope ready to snap. The spark in the throne room is subtle but powerful. You notice it in the small details, the flicker of candlelight reflecting off gold goblets, the harsh shuffle of armored feet, the way courtiers glance at one another, calculating loyalties. A single insult, a single misstep, and words become swords. Mainstream history records these moments as precursors, minor incidents in the march toward war. But you, standing here in imagination, can feel the electric charge. Wars are rarely declared with fanfare. They begin in whispers, in sneers, in tiny provocations magnified by pride. Oddly, one chronicler notes that Philip VI once threw a letter into the fire after reading Edward's claim. Some say it was out of anger, others suggest superstition. Either way, the gesture symbolizes the impossibility of compromise. Once words are consumed in flame, only action remains. Scholars still argue whether Philip could have prevented war with a more measured approach. Could he have offered concessions? Could he have negotiated peace without losing face? The debate continues, but the kingdom doesn't wait for historians. It marches forward, swords in hand. Across the battlefield, Edward's strategy is patient and methodical. He doesn't simply strike. He surveys, plans, and executes. His men march in formation, longbows ready, armor gleaming. Philip's knights, however, still cling to traditional notions of chivalry, charging headlong into positions without consideration of English tactics. The result is predictably disastrous. You follow one young French noble through the carnage, seeing the clash of pride and miscalculation firsthand. Soldiers scream, horses rear, and arrows fill the sky like a dark storm. Victory isn't just about strength, it's about timing, foresight, and understanding the subtle currents of ambition. This is where you realize something crucial. The spark in the throne room, the arrogance, the insults, they all matter. Wars are born not only from claims to crowns, but from human egos, miscalculations, and a refusal to step back. Even Isabella's ghost seems present in these moments. Her choices, her lessons, her ambition, they echo through every maneuver. Edward's victories, Philip's mistakes, the civilian suffering, they all trace back to the subtle power of her influence. You step back, noticing the long shadows cast by the setting sun across the battlefield. Pride has set armies in motion, and though the war will last over a century, its first spark, the arrogance, the insult, the challenge in the throne room, remains burned into history. And so the kingdom edges closer to chaos, not with a roar, but with a whisper. A queen's beauty has done more than charm. It has ignited ambition, stoked resentment, and fanned the flames of a 100-year-long conflict. You step into the countryside, where the war's grandeur fades into mud, blood, and superstition. Knights on gleaming armor are replaced by weary foot soldiers trudging through rain-soaked fields. Smoke curls from burning villages, and the scent of rotting crops mixes with the acrid tang of cannon smoke. Welcome to the messy, terrifying reality of the 100 Years' War. The conflict is no longer a game of thrones or banners. It's a test of endurance, strategy, and sheer survival. You notice the peasants, hiding in barns, watching armies pass like shadows. Their lives, mostly irrelevant to historians, are a silent testament to the devastation a queen's legacy can unleash. Plagues have begun creeping across France, carried by armies and rats alike. You can almost see the fear in the villagers' eyes. Famine, disease, and the constant threat of being conscripted or killed. War isn't just measured in victories, it's measured in suffering. Yet amid this chaos, superstition flourishes. Priests bless arrows, charms hang from soldiers' necks, and local soothsayers whisper of omens in rivers and storms. Oddly, some soldiers claim that seeing Isabella's portrait in an English camp brought courage or madness. Her beauty, long gone from the battlefield, still exerts a strange psychological effect. You wander into one village, where rumors of visions spread like wildfire. A local girl claims she has seen angels directing the English army. Some dismiss her as insane, others whisper that God's favor is clearly shifting. Scholars still argue whether superstition significantly influenced troop movements, but you can sense that belief is as powerful as swords in shaping events. And in the background, the French nobility continues to squabble. Philip II attempts to rally his forces, but divisions run deep. Money is scarce, morale low, and strategic errors begin piling up. Small victories are meaningless when communication falters and loyalty is bought with coin. You find yourself at a battlefield near Crécy, 1346, witnessing the clash firsthand. French knights charge valiantly, but longbowmen rain arrows with devastating accuracy. Horses fall, men scream, and the ground turns into a quagmire of blood and mud. Edward's patience and tactics are impeccable. He's applying lessons from Isabella, strategies honed from observing her diplomacy and cunning. Odd detail. Some chroniclers mention that Edward III personally inspected his soldiers' armor, ensuring that even minor adornments reflected the prestige of his mother's family. A queen's beauty, after all, isn't limited to her own face. It extends into the symbols and pride carried by her descendants. You hear a cry from a French knight, "We fight for honor." But the battlefield has long since become indifferent to ideals. Survival is the only measure now. And as night falls, the English emerge victorious, yet exhausted, their triumph shadowed by the cost of war. Meanwhile, Isabella watches, figuratively across the channel, through her son's actions. She taught him ambition, patience, and the power of perception. Every victory, every strategic maneuver is a reflection of her influence, a reminder that one woman's decisions can echo across decades. You leave the battlefield, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down. The 100 Years' War is no longer just political. It's spiritual, psychological, and deeply human. Knights and peasants alike are caught in the crossfire, and you realize that history's tapestry is woven as much from superstition and oddities as from blood and steel. The war is far from over. But in these early battles, the lessons are clear. Strategy, patience, and a queen's cunning can change the course of nations. You wander into the northern plains of France, where the horizon seems endless, and the air smells faintly of damp earth and smoke. The war has settled into a rhythm: raids, skirmishes, and sieges. No one wins decisively, but everyone suffers. The 100 Years' War is not a straight path. It's a slow, grinding machine fueled by pride, strategy, and a lingering family feud. Edward III consolidates his gains, using his mother Isabella's lessons to maintain control over conquered territories. He builds castles, fortifies towns, and imposes taxes that are both cruel and calculated. Every move reflects a subtle understanding of power, not brute force alone, but manipulation, intimidation, and careful diplomacy. France, on the other hand, struggles to unify. Philip VI commands armies, but internal divisions and corrupt officials weaken his authority. Nobles fight amongst themselves, each protecting personal wealth and lands. You can almost hear their whispered conversations. If the king falls, who will benefit? Not me, certainly. Oddly, amidst the horrors, there are moments of bizarre levity. Chroniclers report English archers playing pranks on local villagers, hiding in bushes to scare them or marking cows with chalk. It's the kind of odd human detail that survives centuries, a reminder that even in war, life continues in strange, incongruous ways. Scholars still argue whether the English longbow was the true game-changer at Crécy and later battles. Some suggest the psychological impact on French knights, trained in chivalric codes, is just as important. Imagine charging into a hail of arrows, your horse terrified, your pride shattered. A queen's legacy in this case is carried on thousands of bowstrings, guiding her son to victory. You cross a battlefield at dawn and see the aftermath. Abandoned helmets, broken lances, and the faint scent of burnt wood. The terrain itself has become a weapon, with mud slowing charges, rivers preventing retreats, and hills giving tactical advantage to those who understand patience. Edward's army moves with precision, his generals obeying orders with discipline rarely seen in medieval warfare. Each success reinforces his belief that he is not only a king, but a strategist, a pupil of Isabella's cunning, inheriting her patience and political acumen. In France, Philip VI attempts counterattacks, but miscommunication and poor timing lead to repeated failures. Villages caught in between armies suffer most. You hear the distant cries of people, some pleading, some resigned, and realize that wars like this are not just fought between kings, but through the lives of ordinary people. Another quirky detail emerges. English knights sometimes carried portraits of Isabella sewn into their armor or clothing. Some say it was superstition. Others say it was homage to the woman who indirectly guided their campaign. Either way, a queen's beauty and influence extended beyond borders and lifetimes, shaping morale in subtle ways. As you stand on the riverbank, watching the campaigns unfold, you notice the quiet moments. Soldiers tending to wounded comrades, local women offering food to troops, even moments of prayer amidst chaos. These human fragments contrast sharply with the grand narrative of crowns and battles, reminding you that history is never one-dimensional. By the end of this campaign season, Edward has strengthened his foothold in northern France. Philip VI retreats, but the conflict is far from over. The war has become a war of attrition, a test of endurance, money, and patience. A century-long struggle born from Isabella's choices, her beauty, and her ambition. And as you look toward the horizon, the faint outline of a castle reminds you. Wars aren't just fought for land. They're fought for legacy. You follow the winding roads of Gascony, where English and French forces continue their chess-like maneuvers. Here, the war is slower, almost methodical. Sieges stretch over months, villages change hands like trading cards, and the countryside bears the scars of repeated campaigns. The land itself seems weary, almost complicit in the century-long conflict. Edward III, now seasoned and deliberate, consolidates his holdings with precision. Castles are reinforced, supply lines secured, and local lords forced to swear loyalty under threat of confiscation. Every action reflects the lessons passed down from Isabella, the art of subtlety, of persuasion, of influence beyond brute force. France, however, struggles with internal division. Philip VI attempts to rally his nobles, but mistrust runs deep. Each failed negotiation chips away at unity. Oddly, some of the quarrels are petty, disputes over hunting rights, wine taxes, or ceremonial precedents. Yet these minor tensions compound into strategic failures, demonstrating how small details shape great wars. You wander among English longbowmen, observing their strange daily rituals. Before battle, some carve protective symbols onto arrows, others whisper prayers to saints for luck. One soldier claims that a small charm depicting Isabella's likeness brings victory. Superstition and morale, it seems, are as important as tactics. Scholars still debate whether these psychological elements had real impact on outcomes. But standing here, you can feel their power. Men fighting for crowns, for glory, for survival, carry with them not only swords but centuries of legend, ambition, and familial influence. The first major siege of Gascony unfolds with a mix of strategy and chaos. English forces blockade the town, cutting off supplies, while Philip VI sends reinforcements that arrive too late or get bogged down in the marshy terrain. Arrows and stones fly, fires spread, and the population suffers most. Civilians whisper that the war is a punishment from heaven, or perhaps the curse of Isabella's beauty that sparked it all. Oddly, you notice that some English soldiers decorate their helmets with intricate engravings, including symbols associated with France. Scholars argue that this was either mockery or a psychological tactic designed to intimidate opponents. Either way, it reflects the intertwining of culture, pride, and warfare. As the siege drags on, Edward's patience proves decisive. He waits for the perfect moment to strike, demonstrating a strategic calm learned from years of observing political machinations in his mother's court. When the final assault comes, it is swift and devastating. Villagers flee, walls crumble, and the town falls with minimal English casualties. Philip VI's response is predictable, yet predictable only in hindsight. Anger drives rash decisions. Cavalry charges fail, coordination falters, and his forces retreat, humiliated. The French crown, already weakened by internal politics, seems unable to recover fully from this blow. You wander past the battlefield, observing the human cost: burned homes, displaced families, and weary soldiers who look less like heroes and more like survivors. And yet, amid this devastation, one thing remains constant: the echo of Isabella's influence. Her beauty, ambition, and cunning are still felt in every decision, every victory, every failure. By the end of this campaign season, Edward III strengthens his position in Gascony, reinforcing England's foothold in France. Philip VI retreats, but the war is far from over. You realize that the conflict has evolved into something larger than crowns or claims. It has become a test of endurance, strategy, and human resilience. And as dusk falls over the ruined villages, you feel the eerie continuity of history. A queen's choices centuries ago continue to ripple through armies, strategy, and landscapes, reminding you that wars are never just about who sits on a throne. They are about the legacies left behind. You traverse the rolling hills of northern France, where villages lie half destroyed and soldiers trudge through mud and blood. The 100 Years' War is no longer a series of quick campaigns. It has become a drawn-out nightmare, stretching on like a shadow over the landscape. And all of this traces back subtly to one queen whose beauty and ambition set it in motion. Edward III is now more than a king. He is a seasoned strategist. His victories at Crécy and Gascony have taught him lessons in logistics, morale, and psychological warfare. He moves his armies like pieces on a chessboard, always thinking several steps ahead. And somewhere in the background, Isabella's influence continues to guide him. a silent tutor shaping every decision. Meanwhile, Philip VI struggles to maintain authority. Internal divisions among French nobles hinder coherent strategy. Some claim that the king's reliance on traditional chivalric ideals blinds him to the evolving tactics of war. Oddly, some French knights are rumored to carry small charms of saints or even Isabella herself. Whether for protection or superstition is unclear. Scholars still debate the impact of such beliefs on battlefield morale, but the fact remains. The English have begun to leverage psychological advantage consistently. You witness the Battle of Poitiers, 1356, unfold from a ridge above the field. The French army, larger and confident, charges with ferocity. Horses rear, lances shatter, and the ground shakes under the weight of armored knights. Yet Edward, calm and measured, orchestrates his forces with precision. Longbowmen rain death upon charging knights, disrupting formations and instilling fear. Odd detail. Some English soldiers reportedly painted their shields with Isabella's emblem, perhaps as homage, perhaps as a symbol of psychological dominance. The queen who sparked the conflict has become a talisman, invisible yet omnipresent. The battle ends catastrophically for France. Philip VI's forces are decimated, many nobles captured or killed, including King John II, who falls prisoner to Edward's forces. England now wields immense leverage over France, not just militarily, but politically. Back in France, morale collapses. Tax collectors face riots, villages struggle to rebuild, and Philip VI, humiliated, faces growing dissent. Yet through all this chaos, Isabella remains a shadowy presence. Even in death, she passed away years earlier. Her lessons, ambition, and charm continue to influence strategy, alliances, and morale across the Channel. You walk among the captured French nobles, noting their despair, their confusion. They are victims not only of Edward's military genius, but of the chain of decisions set in motion by Isabella decades earlier. Beauty, diplomacy, and maternal influence have, in essence, shaped the outcome of battles more decisively than swords alone. Oddly, some chroniclers mention that Edward treated captured nobles with unexpected leniency, negotiating ransoms rather than executions. Perhaps this reflects Isabella's own emphasis on pragmatism over cruelty, a strategy of long-term influence rather than short-term gratification. You observe the landscape after the battle. Villages smoldering, farmland trampled, rivers swollen with rain. The human cost is staggering, yet the English consolidate control and strengthen their position. Isabella's legacy, subtle but omnipresent, has become a central force in this protracted war. As the sun sets over the French plains, you reflect on the enduring truth. One queen's beauty, ambition, and political cunning can ripple through history, shaping events, influencing armies, and leaving an indelible mark on nations for generations. You wander through a French countryside scarred by repeated campaigns, where rivers carry remnants of battles and forests hide wary peasants. The war has settled into a relentless rhythm. Raids, sieges, and scorched earth tactics. And yet, beneath the chaos, one thread continues to tie these events together. A queen whose decisions set the wheels of conflict in motion. Edward III now rules with authority tempered by experience. Every campaign is carefully planned, every supply line meticulously maintained. His strategies reflect a rare blend of patience, cunning, and foresight, lessons absorbed from Isabella's guidance and legacy. Even in her absence, her influence resonates, shaping his decisions as though she were a silent partner in every plan. Philip VI and his successor, John II, attempt to counter Edward's advances, but internal divisions cripple their efforts. Nobles quarrel over taxes, precedence, and spoils, while soldiers grow restless and poorly supplied. Oddly, Chroniclers note that some French knights believed wearing charms of Isabella's likeness would ward off English victories. Superstition and morale, you realize, are intertwined with the machinery of war. You arrive at the field of Poitiers, 1356. The French army, larger and brimming with confidence, marches forward, armor glinting in the weak autumn sun. Edward's forces, smaller but disciplined, hold the high ground. Longbowmen are positioned with precision, ready to unleash a torrent of arrows. The scene is chaotic yet meticulously orchestrated. Odd detail. Some English soldiers sang or recited lines of poetry during the battle, perhaps to maintain morale, perhaps to intimidate. The words echo faintly, mixing with the cries of charging knights and clashing steel, creating a surreal soundtrack to devastation. The battle concludes with French defeat. John II is captured, nobles are ransomed, and the English solidify their strategic position. The psychological impact on France is enormous. Pride wounded, leadership questioned, and villages left in ruin. The consequences ripple far beyond the battlefield. Scholars still debate whether Edward's success was due to tactical brilliance alone, or a combination of strategy and the inherited cunning of Isabella. Either way, the Queen's legacy is undeniable. Her ambition, lessons, and example continue to shape events decades after her death. You walk through the aftermath, observing soldiers tending to the wounded, villagers scavenging for sustenance, and messengers riding off to relay news. History unfolds not just in grand battles, but in these small human moments: fear, hope, and endurance. Oddly, some towns in Gascony continue to celebrate Edward's victories with improvised festivals, showing how legends take root even amid tragedy. The Queen's shadow, it seems, touches both the powerful and the commoners alike. By the end of the year, the balance of power has shifted. England's foothold in France strengthens, the French crown struggles to maintain authority, and the war stretches endlessly into the horizon. You realize, standing amid the ruins, that this conflict is more than armies clashing. It is a testament to the enduring influence of a queen's choices, beauty, and ambition. And in that realization, you feel the quiet, inexorable pull of history, as if Isabella herself is whispering across the centuries. The game has only just begun. You walk along the muddy roads of northern France, where every village seems to carry scars from previous campaigns. Smoke still curls from burned homes, and rivers are dotted with debris from raided towns. The 100 Years' War has become a grinding machine, devouring men, resources, and time. And at the heart of it all lies Isabella's quiet, enduring influence, a subtle spark behind every campaign, every conquest. Edward III has matured into a ruler defined by patience and strategy. He is no longer simply chasing titles or glory. He is building a dynasty, consolidating power in ways his mother taught him. Every fortress he reinforces, every alliance he secures, and every tax he levies reflects lessons learned from Isabella's intelligence, charm, and subtle manipulation. France, meanwhile, struggles under Philip VI and John II. Nobles continue to squabble, finances are strained, and communication is slow. Oddly, chroniclers report that some French commanders consulted astrology before engaging in battle, believing that the alignment of stars might counter Edward's momentum. Scholars still debate how much superstition influenced outcomes, but the recurring theme is clear. Fear and perception can be as potent as steel. You reach the outskirts of Calais, a strategic port city. Edward's focus on logistics and supply lines, inspired by Isabella's practical acumen, ensures that English forces maintain control over the channel. Control of the port is more than symbolic. It allows England to reinforce, supply, and coordinate campaigns across France efficiently. Oddly, the English garrison decorates the walls with images of Isabella, asserting a psychological presence even in her absence. The Queen's legacy, subtle yet persistent, permeates strategy, morale, and propaganda. It is both inspiration and intimidation for those who witness it. You watch as Edward orchestrates the siege of Calais with precision. The French attempt countermeasures, but indecision and disunity thwart them. Villagers endure hardship, caught between the armies, a human cost rarely acknowledged in official chronicles. Yet these small stories are the lifeblood of history, revealing the consequences of decisions made by kings and queens alike. Scholars still argue whether Isabella's influence was more strategic or symbolic, but her mark is undeniable. Her teachings echo in every tactical choice, every act of patience, and every exploitation of enemy weakness. Edward's victories are not solely his own. They are an extension of the lessons, ambition, and cunning of the mother, who once dared to challenge the order of kingdoms. The siege concludes successfully. Calais falls, providing England with a strong foothold on the continent. Philip VI is humiliated further, morale plummets, and whispers of the Queen who started it all grow louder across Europe. Isabella's beauty and political savvy, once considered tools of domestic influence, now ripple across nations and generations. You step back, observing the port city's transformation. Soldiers repair walls, merchants resume trade under English oversight, and a strange calm settles over the city. The echoes of war remain, but control and order, however temporary, now rest in the hands of Edward, a ruler still guided by the lessons of Isabella. And as the sun sets, casting long shadows over Calais, you realize something profound. History is not just shaped by battles, but by personalities, ambition, and the enduring influence of those who refuse to be forgotten. You wander into the autumn fields of northern France, where the leaves are turning golden and the wind carries the faint scent of smoke from distant villages. The war has settled into a rhythm, skirmishes, sieges, and slow campaigns, but the underlying tension never dissipates. Each move, each decision, reverberates across the channel, echoing Isabella's long-vanished presence. Edward III continues to consolidate his authority. He enforces discipline, secures supply lines, and strengthens alliances with local nobles, lessons drawn directly from Isabella's example. Her ability to navigate courts, manipulate loyalties, and assert influence resonates in Edward's careful orchestration of campaigns. You realize that he is not merely a warrior, he is a student of his mother's subtle, unrelenting genius. Oddly, chroniclers note that English soldiers carried tiny charms depicting Isabella's likeness during key battles. Some claim it brought luck, others argue it was superstition. Either way, it demonstrates how her presence, physical or symbolic, continues to affect morale, shaping the psychology of soldiers and commanders alike. Scholars still debate how much Isabella's guidance influenced Edward's strategic brilliance. Was it her cunning, her ambition, or merely the inspiration of a mother's pride that drove him? Either way, her legacy is undeniable in every tactical decision, every measured advance, and every negotiation of power. You arrive at the fields of Poitiers, where echoes of past battles linger like ghosts. Edward's forces engage the French once more. The French army, confident and numerous, charges with traditional bravado, relying on chivalric codes and cavalry charges. But Edward's longbowmen, disciplined and lethal, dominate the battlefield. Horses stumble, knights fall, and chaos erupts. Oddly, soldiers report seeing shadows or apparitions of Isabella on the battlefield, though these could be tricks of the light or imagination. Still, the story spread, enhancing the psychological weight of her legacy. Fear, respect, and superstition intertwine, amplifying Edward's advantage. You notice the human cost. Villages destroyed, civilians displaced, wounded soldiers moaning in the mud. The war is no longer abstract. It is lived, experienced, and endured by ordinary people, far from the gilded halls of kings and queens. And yet, Isabella's indirect influence shapes these events as surely as the decisions of generals. By the end of the campaign, Edward's victories are decisive. French morale is shattered, nobles are captured, and England secures a strategic upper hand. Isabella's beauty, intellect, and ambition, once the sparks of controversy in courts, have become a force felt across continents, decades after her passing. You stand among the quiet ruins, the wind rustling through the grass, reflecting on the ripple effect of her choices. Wars are not born solely from politics or greed. They are often ignited by the ambitions, beauty, and cunning of a single influential figure. And as dusk settles over the battle-scarred land, you realize that Isabella's legacy has not only shaped her son, but the very trajectory of European history itself. Her shadow lingers over kings, armies, and civilians alike, proving that beauty, intelligence, and ambition can ignite wars that last generations. You step into the twilight of the 100 Years' War, where years of conflict have worn down both the land and its people. Villages are ghostly, fields trampled, and rivers swollen from the relentless campaigns. Yet amid this devastation, one thread remains consistent: the enduring influence of Isabella, the queen whose beauty and ambition set this chain of events in motion. Edward III, now older and seasoned, governs with authority and caution. His military campaigns are measured, his alliances carefully nurtured, and his strategic foresight remarkable. Every decision, every calculated move, carries the echo of Isabella's lessons: how to wield power subtly, how to turn personal influence into political advantage. You realize that his victories are as much psychological as they are tactical. Oddly, some chroniclers report that Edward, even in his later years, kept a miniature portrait of Isabella on his desk, a constant reminder of her guidance. Scholars still debate whether this was sentimental or a tool to reinforce his own sense of legitimacy and purpose. Either way, her presence, though invisible, continues to shape history. You observe the people living amidst the aftermath: peasants struggling to rebuild homes, soldiers adjusting to quieter days, and nobles cautiously resuming political maneuvering. The war has reshaped society in ways both subtle and catastrophic. Isabella's indirect influence touches all levels of life, reminding you that her impact extends far beyond her immediate family or court. Battles have taught lessons not only in warfare, but in human endurance. Villages fortified, castles rebuilt, and the collective memory of survivors preserve the story of one queen whose personal choices sparked a continent-wide conflict. Oddly, some towns celebrate annual reenactments of sieges, commemorating victories that trace back in part to Isabella's cunning and charm. Scholars still argue over whether the war could have been avoided, whether different alliances or claims might have prevented decades of suffering. But history shows that the combination of ambition, familial claims, and a queen's influence created a situation that was nearly impossible to resolve peacefully. As you wander through the quiet countryside, you notice the subtle reminders of her legacy: inscriptions on castles, heraldic symbols in towns, and even references in songs and poems. Isabella's beauty and political acumen have left an indelible mark, shaping not only Edward's actions, but the very structure of medieval Europe. And now, as the final campaigns fade into history, you feel a strange sense of closure. The war, though prolonged, was a direct product of choices made long before, decisions that combined charm, ambition, and a willingness to challenge norms. A queen's beauty, once a source of admiration and controversy, became the catalyst for a century-long struggle that reshaped nations. You breathe in the cool evening air, the distant hum of life continuing around you. The battles are over, but the echoes of Isabella's influence remain, whispering through time, reminding you that power, cunning, and beauty can leave marks that last centuries. Now, as the evening deepens and the last rays of sun fade behind the horizon, you find yourself standing alone in a quiet field. The chaos of centuries-long wars has softened into memory, leaving only whispers carried on the cool breeze. You can hear the faint rustle of leaves, the distant call of a nightbird, and the gentle trickle of a nearby stream. The world feels still, almost suspended, as if time itself pauses to reflect on what has passed. You think back to Isabella, her beauty, her ambition, her clever influence that rippled across generations. It's remarkable how one life, one set of choices, can cast shadows so long and so powerful. In this calm, you realize that history is not only made in grand battles or royal courts, but in the subtleties, whispered advice, strategic patience, and even the quiet determination to challenge what seems inevitable. Oddly comforting, you notice fireflies drifting lazily above the grass, their soft lights flickering like tiny reminders of lives touched, decisions made, and legacies left behind. Scholars may debate motives and outcomes, but here, in this soft twilight, it doesn't matter. The human story is clear. Beauty, cunning, and determination can shape the course of history, leaving impressions that echo long after the voices that began them are gone. As you take a deep breath, you feel a gentle sense of closure. The wars, the battles, the sieges, they all fade into memory, leaving a quieter, reflective space. Isabella's influence lingers like a soft hum, reminding you that even in the midst of chaos, a single person's choices can ripple through time. So, let your mind drift, let your eyes grow heavy, and let the weight of centuries settle softly around you. The stories of kings, queens, and battles will remain in your imagination. But for now, the world is peaceful, the night calm, and your journey through history comes to a gentle close. Whisper to yourself, "It's all past now. Everything will be okay."